Resident Evil Village continues Ethan and Mia Winter's story. It starts with Chris Redfield killing Mia and taking their baby for unknown reasons. Capcom has injected a lot of systems and ideas from older Resident Evil titles into this game, as well as improved the first-person horror shooter experience that Resident Evil 7 found success in. Resident Evil Village is an absolutely beautiful game. The attention to detail can be seen in the entire game, and every new zone you enter reflects what is to be expected from that area's boss. From Lady Demetrius' noble and posh castle to Moreau's swamp that has buildings rotting away and falling apart. The sound design in Resident Evil has always been great, and Village is no exception. From hearing crows flap their wings in the distance, to passing a small hole in the castle, and hearing the wind come through the wall, it truly sets the atmosphere of this game. The story is well paced throughout the whole game. The game itself only really slows down when the player commits to exploring or backtracking to find treasures or resources. Ethan has a little more depth as a character, but for the most part he's just a guy that's always at the wrong place at the wrong time, and survives from sheer willpower while every single big bash boss character doubts him. Chris Redfield is a man that went from a hero with hope of stopping bioterrorism to a grizzled veteran that fights bioterrorism because that's really all he knows, which from the events from previous games makes sense since the man that he wanted to be his successor has died. I would have liked to know more about Chris and Ethan's relationship before the events of Village, but Capcom's writing is usually in this style where this character is just like this now. Like what they did with Leon in Resident Evil 2, he's just a rookie cop, and then you jump to Resident Evil 4 and he's a one-man army that works for the president. The Duke was a welcome surprise to be sure. He's an ally in Ethan in a place where everything is against him. His motives and origins are a mystery, but that makes you like him even more. It adds to his charm. The Duke is also used as a Christopher Nolan plot explaining device, in that he tells Ethan what he has to do and explains the world and the people of the village at every story beat. And honestly, I think it's a good thing. It gives the player enough info to know why they are doing something rather than just the Resident Evil gameplay loop of find item to open next door. Mother Miranda and the four lords of the village are some of the best written and charming villains to come to Resident Evil. Each one is distinct from each other with very different motivations for why they do the things that they do. Resident Evil Village improves all the good things from the previous entry and adds old beloved Resident Evil systems to make a great gameplay experience. The treasure system in Village is reminiscent of Resident Evil 4, but a little more grounded in realism, as enemies will drop currency and crafting materials, things that are more realistic on what they would have on their person at the time. The weapon upgrade system is great to see again, but on my first playthrough, it seemed very trivial, as the only upgrades that seemed useful at the time were reload and fire rate, since damage upgrades were just not worth it till late game when you could dump a lot of currency into them all at once. Like, all I did for most of this game was buy the 1911 and walk at enemies and hold down the trigger, and you would normally just score a crit anyways without having to slow down and aim. Hunting for the Duke was a welcome addition, something extra for you to do, but it didn't seem incredibly impactful. The enemies of Resident Evil Village are pretty much just Resident Evil 4 and Resident Evil 5 enemies. They'll, for the most part, walk towards you, dodge out of the way of the bullets, and sometimes rush you. But unlike RE4 and RE5, Village enemies are very bullet spongy. Most of them feel tedious to fight, and often the only threat in most encounters were the enemies that were missed or exified that you had no other choice but to run. These issues don't get better as the game progresses, with Heisenberg's area being the worst culprit of this, where every enemy is pretty much just an armored Mr. X, with a big red spot to shoot to stun them. They also had a set chase distance where they would pursue you for a set distance from where you first encounter them, making the threat of them minor. Village level design follows the standard Resident Evil formula. There's a central area you will always come back to that connects to the other zones that have a save point as the game progresses. You unlock more doors that you can open in the center zone to get more resources or weapons. Village rewards a player that wants to explore and that you'll find mini bosses, weapons, resources, which is welcome, although having to backtrack to all these areas to grab treasures is very tedious. And the mini bosses suffer the same exploit that plagues Heisenberg's area.
You want to fight me neither. Kick that, man.
In that they will only pursue you so far from where they initially spawn, so they're easily cheesable, making their fights more a chore than anything. The marble ball thing was weird and gave me PTSD from Zelda Breath of the Wild. Only zone in this game that is just bad is Heisenberg's. And you have to backtrack to this molder machine too many times to progress the zone. The factory is too dark, it's hard to get your bearings. It's very unfortunate that the factory is the final zone. It leaves a bad taste in the player's mouth, especially with how great the other zones are. The boss fights of Resident Evil Village are not bad by any means, but they definitely could have been better. Lady Dimitrescu and her daughters were not very interesting. I expected the daughters to be more dynamic, or for Ethan to have to fight them all at once, but it was just really just shoot a window open and that's it. Only one of the daughters' fight was interesting, where you had to blow open a wall to be able to damage her. But other than that, they were just slightly more bullet spongy than the standard Resident Evil Village Lycan. The Lady Dimitrescu fight was funny to me because it's literally just Capcom's version of Solid Snake fighting the Hind D in Metal Gear Solid.
You're the one who's cursed. That takes care of the cremation.
The dollhouse I'm including as an entire boss of itself. The dollhouse is essentially an expanded version of the Happy Birthday puzzle in Resident Evil 7. It's a good change of pace from how the rest of the game plays. It slowly builds suspense and terror as the player explores more and more of the house, with the ending of the level being a hide-and-seek deathmatch with a creepy doll. On the first playthrough of the dollhouse, it's great. However, on subsequent playthroughs is more of a tedious, boring part of the game. Moro's fight is what if Leon didn't have a boat and had to fight the lake monster. Moro is probably the best boss fight out of the entire game. He changes the environment as the fight goes on, and he forces you to move around and think as he uses this acid rain attack, and he also destroys the environment as the fight goes on. However, he suffers from having a low health pool, as you can cheese him very easily with explosives, making the fight kind of lackluster, but definitely my favorite in the entire game.
In death as he was in life. Disgusting.
You're like a goddamn cockroach.
Heisenberg has to be the biggest disappointment of a boss fight for a character that is dripping with charm. He has magneto powers that only really serve as a plot device for him to talk to Ethan. He carries around a cool steampunk hammer that he never uses and that Ethan can find, put together, and sell to the Duke, with the big boss fight being a Transformer movie with Ethan in a homemade tank that happens to be made out of plot armor. Mother Miranda's fight is engaging, has its high points, but could use just some more sauce to make it a true final boss fight. But it follows the standard final boss formula. Do a set amount of damage, for a couple phases, land the layup final hit, roll credits. On the whole, I enjoyed this game. It got a lot of things right, but there's definite room for improvement to be made. This game heavily relies on the refrigerator test. If you don't know what that is, it's a concept Alfred Hitchcock came up with. Essentially, it's something in a movie that you accept in the moment, but then you get home and you open the fridge and you grab a drink and think, wait a second, that movie didn't make any sense. It doesn't matter if it makes sense, it just has to work on the audience at the moment. And Resident Evil Village is full of things that only work in the moment.
No, doesn't change anything.
Bringing back old Resident Evil systems was a delight. The environments and sound design are nearly perfect. The world building of Village and character development was fantastic for a Resident Evil game. I can't wait to see how they build off of Village for the next entry in the IP.
K9, I want to know what
Thank you so much for watching the whole video. I really do appreciate it. Please leave a like and comment down below. It'll help the channel grow. If you liked what you saw, please subscribe. Also, my Twitch is in the description where I play games that I love as well as the ones I'll be reviewing. Thanks again.